This is Bob again, recording a voiceover on May 10th. This video includes clips I took before and after the Metro Council's 4 p.m. May 6th Committee of the Whole meeting. However, most of the content is an audio recording supplied by the Metro Council of the meeting. Because they apparently do not put audio recordings of Committee of the Whole meetings online, I thought it was important to make this available to the public, including other media, as soon as possible, especially because the Minnesota legislature is constitutionally required to adjourn on or before May 18th. I expected this meeting to take place in the council chambers. Full council meetings are held there twice a month and are both live streamed and available as video on demand from the Metro Council's website. I now suspect that the council's real work gets done at Committee of the Whole meetings such as this one. That would explain why these unbroadcast meetings are more difficult for the public to follow. I conclude from this meeting that the Metro Council plans to conduct a sham process to look at a few alternatives to light rail before continuing with the plan they've had all along, building a Southwest Light Rail extension of the now existing Green Line according to their current alignment. They will almost certainly turn in a revised light rail plan with cuts to bring the budget, at least on paper, back to the $1.6 billion range or less. Here's what I see as the most crucial point. While Governor Dayton and Council Chair Dunnick are both reported to be saying other options, including a no-build option, are on the table, the discussion at this meeting, including a statement by Chair Dunnick, clearly shows that no-build has on a de facto basis already been ruled out as an option. This is Bob again. It's a little after 4. On Wednesday, May 6th. And I'm in the room A in the basement at the Metropolitan Council. There's one TV crew here, Channel 5, I believe it's Channel 5, and the meeting apparently is not being videotaped for making it available to the public. This is a meeting of the Committee of the Whole of the Metropolitan Council. Hi, Bob again. You got time for a couple questions? That's Chair Dunnick.
So Bob, we're going to do it this month still, and we're definitely going to vote on it by the end of May. But we just thought you could see in the news around Southwest LRT that this was a little more timely to have this information today. Certainly the staff has made the rounds. CTIB this morning and the Quarter Management Committee this afternoon, so they've perfected the presentation, but appreciate everyone being able to meet and take up this item today.
We're going to walk outside for just a minute. The meeting started very quietly. In fact, it was called to order, and I thought that they were pretending. There's no microphones. It's very difficult to hear, but we were told, please to not talk very loud because they're conducting a meeting. So that's what's going on here. I'm going to get back in here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. We always work towards perfection, but it is truly a work in progress. So thank you for your time and attention today.
Mr. Herman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. We always work towards perfection, but it is truly a work in progress. So thank you for your time and attention today. What we wanted to do is to update you on the latest in terms of the Southwest LRT project. And really we'll divide it into 3 segments for the discussion today. One is kind of looking back here in the last 9 or 10 days as to the project budget and project schedule changes and how so and why. Part 2 will be looking ahead, looking forward on those tasks that Chair Dunnick and the Governor have given to us and how we plan to follow up on those here in the coming 8 weeks or so. And then thirdly, just upcoming meeting schedule for Committee of the Whole and the Council as we work through these assignments. So I'll start with the first, and that is the budget and the schedule update. It's well known, but let me just anchor us with this budget has increased significantly. from the former adopted by you all on July 9th of last year of 1.65 to 1.994 billion. And the project schedule has moved out 1 year from late 2019 into calendar 2020. So let's get into why those changes. I thought it'd be good just to take a moment and take a step back as to how these very large, this actually will be the largest public infrastructure project in the history of Minnesota, just like the Green Line was last year. This is even longer and more complicated and more costly. And so how does that play out over the course of project development? And so this graphic is intended to illustrate that and kind of where we have come from. The DEIS in 2012 had 1% level of design. A year ago, when the 5 cities and the county gave their municipal consent approval, we had about 20% design complete. And right now, the point in time where we are at now is the what we call the mid-project development, or the 40% of the design development. And as we continue to refine and gather more design detail, then we have less uncertainty. And that inverse relationship applies to all these big projects as you go through more and more detailed design. FTA requires that we carry contingency on these projects, and so I'll speak more when we get to more of the budget detail, but I have reported to you previously that we've been carrying a 27% project contingency. We've been carrying that throughout. That applied to the 1.65 billion last year. We've extended that same assumption, 27% contingency, and applied that to the new dollars as well. So that additional contingency is also included in this $1.99 billion new estimate. What do we do during the stepwise process of the design development? This has been a question that we've been asked numerous times in the last 9 days. I wanted to give you a little bit more background on this. In the DIS, the 1% that was basically in place in 2012 when the DIS was published, the level of design was about probably 25 plan sheets. 16-mile long project, 25 sheets, so about 1.5 pages per mile of detail. It's not a lot of detail. As we went through last year's process, really defining what the scope was going to be, where the tracks and stations were going to be in Eden Prairie, where the OMF, the maintenance facility, was going to be located in Hopkins, and then thirdly, the work that we did in Minneapolis as to the question of freight rail, light rail. The ultimate decision approved by you was the co-location, where they would continue to coexist in the Kenilworth corridor. So those 3 key changes have been captured now in the supplemental draft environmental impact statement. I'll give you more time detail on that in a moment. And we've got last summer about 500 pages of design detail at 20%. Now, as we've advanced that up to 30%, which was completed last fall, based on those design directives from you, and now at the 40% level, we have advanced up to about 2,400 pages of design detail. So what we've been able to do to inform that detail is a lot of field work, since you gave approval of the final scope of tracks, stations, freight rail, light rail. And you can see there in the bottom row what additional work we've done. A year ago, when we were at $1.65 billion, we had completed the desk review and field observations in terms of the archaeological, environmental impacts, wetland impacts. Since then, last summer, during the fall and winter, we've been able to actually get out in the field and do much more technical analysis, on the ground, boots on the ground analysis. That's final surveying, what properties we would impact that we would need to acquire, exactly the delineation of the wetlands per the Army Corps of Engineers definition that we must follow, as we will need to ultimately secure a permit from the Corps for building in existing wetlands. Soil borings, that was a key input for us in identifying additional hazardous contaminated areas that we will need to remediate. and soft soils that require additional structural support for the many structures. We have 42 structures on this project over 16 miles. So there's about 34 bridges of different types, 2 tunnels, and then some pedestrian structures as well for trails. So that's just a quick summary of how the design progresses, and we get more and more finite detail. That allows us then to take that detail, bring it back to the project office last winter, design it, and then here in the last few weeks we've been able to assign cost to that and update the cost with the additional $341 million total. The 3-wheel drivers, and I'll get into a little bit more detail at a summary level in a moment, are really the environmental requirements that are dictated to us primarily from the National Environmental Policy Act, wetlands and floodplains, and how we need to mitigate those where we do impact those. The engineering, I spoke to the soft soils and contaminated soils. And then operational, certainly safety is our first priority at Metro Transit. And we've identified some more hazardous light rail crossings that need some additional crossing arm protection. And we have 5 shared crossings with freight rail in this corridor, where both Federal Rail Administration and Federal Transit are encouraging us to put in more safety measures. Additional property acquisitions based on the final surveys, additional retaining walls, and then the delay from 2019 to 2020 has a cost too, because we assume 3% inflation on a project of this magnitude. That adds up to $50 million from shifting from 2019 to 2020. This is just a chart for your benefit to see a little bit more discreetly. I'm not going to go through it for you, but this is how FTA does their accounting on these big New Start rail projects. I would just highlight the fact that the construction piece, the top half of the chart, shows that 2/3 of the cost increase is attributable to construction expense. 1/3 of the 341 is attributable to non-construction cost, right-of-way, 3 more vehicles, and engineering and the contingency component that I mentioned a little bit ago. Well, hopefully I'm projecting okay so you all can hear me. I don't know what you'll do for the tape, Emily, but is this working better, Greg?
Can you hear that back there?
Test, test, test.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Russo?
So in essence of the $207 million of construction increase, 50 of it is due to the delay, correct?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Reynoso, the $50 million would be in the bottom half of the chart in the soft cost row. Well, let me adjust that. You're asking about the $50 million delay?
Correct.
Yes, that is incorporated. I'm sorry to back up a second with the microphone interruption. The $50 million delay is embedded into the first 5 rows under construction, because that's really the cost of materials, cost of labor is really where the inflation does exist. So it appears in the 207.
A quick other question related to that. Where is contingency carry? Is that in the soft costs?
Yes, sir.
Councilmember Chavez?
Thank you. Mark, do I recall correctly that the 27% contingency is required by law? Or is that just what we've customarily done, or a combination thereof?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Chavez, no requirement by law. It is a guideline that FTA establishes, and they look at each project critically as they conduct a risk assessment, and through that process, they will then assign the project what the risk and contingency adequacy is. So just comparatively back to Green Line, FTA required that we carry a 20% contingency. So right now, we're a little bit heavy as we would compare ourselves to our Green Line experience. We found that 20% for Green Line was just about right. But FTA still has to come in, and they will come in this fall to assess that 27%. Is that just about right? Is it a little bit too rich or not sufficient? But they will still need to do that review, they call it a risk assessment, to the contingency in the fall.
Thank you.
The cost drivers by construction component here, I'll just highlight maybe one from each page. Because of the soft soils, we have a lot more retaining walls to hold hills above our tracks in place and hills below our tracks in place to keep the tracks stable and secure. So we have now over 270,000 square feet of retaining walls on this project. And these are necessary in large part where we've got a lot of topography, which we do out in Minnetonka and in Eden Prairie.
Councilmember Chavez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As far as the concept for the retaining walls, are these covered, concealed, submerged retaining walls, or are they going to be exposed if it was to be built in North Carolina?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chavez, it would be some of both.
Okay. Thank you.
Stations, we have 17 new stations to add to the Green Line with this project, in addition to the 23 that exist today on the Green Line. And so we have a couple cost drivers here that you can see on slide 10, and that is joint development. We've included potential joint development at Blake Station. That's a little over $10 million for the overall project. City of Hopkins is very interested in this and the opportunity that exists at Hopkins Station for some much more intense development. And I'm sure Councilmember Munt can speak more to that on some of the meetings and neighborhood folks that you're talking with. And then probably the other big cost driver here is 3 of our stations in Minneapolis, the Westlake, Penn, and Van White stations, have vertical connections. In the case of Westlake and Van White, bridges over top where people may be walking or biking, and so we need to provide them a way to get downstairs to the platform. And then Penn Station, we have a elevated trail bikeway that would come into that station, so that's an additional expense that we've fully captured now. The operation and maintenance facility, it is in Hopkins. Hopkins was agreeable to locating it after we reviewed 17 sites last year on where it would best be located. And as we got onto the site and did more analysis, we found more contamination than what we had first thought. And we found that there's some groundwater movement through that site, so we have to contain and manage that through the construction of a culvert so it doesn't disrupt our foundations of the actual facility or of our tracks in and around the yard for the trains. Site work, here is where we pick up some of the wetland issues as we have delineated, and the Army Corps of Engineers have signed off where those are. Where we do impact them with track or structures, we have to then mitigate. And based on the watershed that we're working with, those mitigations now are being developed. So we've included cost of right-of-way and cost of building new wetlands to replace the ones that we are displacing. On the systems piece, this is really our train control and train communication. That's what we mean by when we refer to systems. So here's where the safety component really is the prevailing consideration. We have 5 crossings where we are recommending to institute gate protection to protect vehicles from trains in some of those heavy traveled arterial streets out on the west end. We also have 5 shared crossings between freight rail and light rail. And as I mentioned, FRA and FTA are recommending that we put in additional protections there where both trains are running in parallel. So that comes as additional costs that we've captured in the new estimate.
Councilmember Rodriguez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How much approximately is a crossing arm, or does it vary by the crossing?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Rodriguez, it does vary. It depends on the number of lanes that are crossing the tracks in terms of just the equipment and the gate crossing arms. Typically a rule of thumb for a standard, so I would say it probably is going to be higher for some of the more 4-lane arterials in Eden Prairie, less for the smaller residential streets such as at 21st Street in Minneapolis. Rule of thumb, I would say a range of probably $250,000 to $500,000 per crossing. But that does vary depending on the intersection.
Thank you.
Moving out of construction to the non-construction, it really is being driven, the new cost, by right-of-way acquisition requirements, as you can see here, with about 8% more right-of-way that's been identified. Some relocations. This number is, let me kind of put a caveat on that. Relocation increase of 99 sounds like we're displacing very, very many businesses. Well, the situation there is most of those relocations are in and around the maintenance facility in Shady Oak Station and Hopkins. But almost half of the new relocations are individual self-storage units, and the FTA requires us to count that as one business. But under federal law, in this case the law does mandate that if we are acquiring it, we do have to pay for relocation. That self-storage unit is considered one relocation. And then lastly, as I mentioned, a delay has a cost, and so we've captured that $50 million here into the new estimate. On the schedule piece, we had anticipated up until recently that we'd be able to complete construction, the heavy construction in 2018, allowing us to put the systems in, do all the testing, safety certification in 2019, and open at the end of 19. We cannot achieve that anymore, and so we have shifted the opening date into 2020. And here's just a different look at it, and I would highlight that really a critical path date for us is that second activity on the chart. That's the final EIS, and the record of decision is what ROD stands for. It's not an abbreviation for Councilmember Rodriguez's name, but what that means is that we have to finish that next year, which we had previously thought we could finish that at the end of this year. That won't be completed until this time next year, Q2 next year, and only upon completion of the environmental work and issuance of the record of decision, then are we eligible to start buying property and starting some early construction, some early utility relocation in 16. And then not until 17 can we begin full heavy construction. 3 years of that gets us then into 2020. So, Mr. Chair, I will pause there for a moment, and I'm happy to respond to questions on how we got to where we are on the updated 1.99 cost and the schedule delay.
Councilmember Dorfman.
Mark, did you mention on your list of primary cost drivers, there's one bullet here for required vapor mitigation system. Did you mention that? What is that about?
Mr. Chair and Council Member, I did not mention that, so let me give you a little more background on what that means. At the OMF site, there is some existing contamination, and some of that is of a nature that it naturally evaporates from the contaminated soil, and so we have to manage that. And that's a EPA and a MPCA requirement, so we have to do that to satisfy their needs as well as to keep the site safe so there's not any excess vapors.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that you went over this before, but can you go over it again? The need for the additional vehicles?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Rodriguez, I didn't really highlight that, so thank you for bringing us back to that. We do have in the non-construction line item of 3 additional vehicles. at an estimated cost of $18 million. That does include some contingency as well. And the need for that is caused by the fact that we have what we say vertical curves. That means up and downs, as well as a lot of turns, including curved bridges on the west end of this alignment. And as we finalized that design, we found that the train speed assumptions were slower than what we had previously thought. Slower train means that we need to maintain our 10-minute service frequency like we have on the Green Line today. Since we interline with the Green Line, we have to maintain 10 minutes on the west end as well as 10 minutes on the east end. The slower train time then means we need one more three-car train to maintain that 10-minute frequency from end to end, from Mitchell Road and Eden Prairie to Union Depot and St. Paul.
Councilmember Rodriguez?
Thank you. So you said on the west end, from what station on is that causing the problem?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Rodriguez, we really are updating our running time model, is what we call it, the time it takes to run the trains on this new 16-mile segment. So what we've been focusing on is the Mitchell Road to Target Field Station. But I remind us all that that same train will then continue on through downtown and on to the Green Line over to the U and to St. Paul.
If I understand your question correctly, I think it's hard to pinpoint where that increased time is. There's some of it that we know because of the curvatures, but other than that, it could be occurring at a lot of different places along the corridor, right, Mark?
Yep, that's right, Mr. Chair and Councilmember. We've modeled the whole 16 miles. Predominantly, the additional time or the slower speeds is occurring on the west end in Eden Prairie and Minnetonka. There are some throughout. And so our running time model has captured that and shows that speed is slower and the running time is longer. So we need that one more three-car train is what we captured in this updated estimate.
Thank you.
Can I just ask one question related to that? Can you or have you looked at doing 11-minute running times? Would that eliminate the need for 3 additional cars? Could you look at it would alter the Green Line, the whole Green Line, but would that be an option, going to 11 or 12-minute running time instead of 10? Would that throw off the synchronization with Hiawatha? Or?
Mr. Chair, we have not engaged our service development office to look at that option. What we will need to do as part of the top to bottom review of these costs, vehicles is a piece of that, is to perhaps look at a sensitivity analysis as to, can we run something longer than a 10-minute frequency? I can tell you that when we first started doing the testing for Green Line, we've got pretty narrow windows to insert those trains because the blue and the green operate in tandem in that 5-station shared segment in downtown Minneapolis. So we really need that 2.5-minute window as we alternate blue, green going through downtown. By changing the 10-minute, that will impact our ability to keep that frequency consistent between blue, green, and so that's something that we certainly can look at, but it will be something that we have to focus how that would impact downtown service.
Councilmember Dorfman?
So you've got the joint development at Blake. Isn't there a joint development at Beltline too? Is that not also a cost driver?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Dorfman, we've been working on 2 possible joint development sites. The Beltline is not included in this updated estimate based on conversations with City of St. Louis Park. I haven't been personally involved in those. But that was one of the actions that we had considered just to slim the new estimate down to the 1.99.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Councilmember Cunningham?
Thank you. I apologize for being a little late. I'm just wondering, we're, and I don't know if my assumptions are correct, so you can correct me, but we're at the 60% of engineering at this point. And so my question really is about And we have these cost drivers that will, some of them will continue on beyond this point. We put in some cost mitigations. So as we go on with this project, the probability of the cost even increasing more is highly probable, or not probable in your opinion?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, that's a really good question, and let me take a step back and provide a little bit larger context. Really, the cost driver of this increase, this very significant $341 million increase, has been driven by more design detail that has enabled us to get a much more precise estimate, thus the additional $333 million cost. We're at about 40% design complete, but we are now complete with all the preliminary engineering and beginning the advanced preliminary engineering. We've really anchored in the ground where track, stations, bridges, tunnels will be. And so that is able now to inform what the cost estimate is to really build this project as currently defined. Having said that, looking ahead, you are correct that there still exists risk. And how I've characterized that is there's certainly the market risk, which is when we go to bid the projects, what the contracting community comes back with bids on Central Corridor Green Line. We're very fortunate that we hit the nadir of the Great Recession. And so contractors are hungry, and bids came in $34 million below budget. What happens with the Chinese economy, which drives a lot of our steel prices and a little bit of our oil prices, what happens here locally with our own local construction market. I told some of the other committees earlier today, as I look at the landscape, what I see is some pretty big construction projects coming to a close in 2016. Two biggest examples would be the St. Croix River Crossing project for not quite $700 million, and the new football stadium for about $1 billion. So there's contractors and there's hundreds of subcontractors on those two projects that are going to be looking for work right at the time that we're going to come to market 16 or 17 with our bid packages. How that plays out with the macro and the regional markets, no one can precisely estimate that. And then the last piece to respond to your question is there's always the construction risk. So once we're in the ground, beginning in 2017, assuming that this project proceeds, there's the utilities that weren't on the utility map from the city that we will encounter, and then we'll have to relocate that, pay for that from our contingency budget. And certainly there's the right-of-way risk as well as we purchase the property as we prepare for construction.
Mr. Chairman, just a follow-up question. So the environmental impact issues that still remain outstanding aren't a part of that equation as well?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Cunningham, the supplemental draft environmental impact statement, I did not mention this earlier, is in its final preparation stages. FTA has completed their review and has begun preparation to publish that document here in the coming weeks before the month is out. So I know that many of your constituents have anxiously and patiently awaited for that document, and it will be published by FTA here in the next few weeks. In terms of where we identify the project causes an impact under that environmental review, then it's the project's responsibility to mitigate for that, whether that's the wetland example I gave before or other impacts that the project is causing. We have captured what we believe the mitigation cost would be to address those impacts.
So that's already built in, is what I'm hearing you say?
Mr. Chair, remember, into the updated estimate, since we have completed the SDIS, we know generally the concepts of the mitigation that will be required, and so we have sought to estimate that and capture that in this estimate.
Thank you.
Councilor Chavez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mark, my question or comment right now. I don't want to forget it for the rest of the meeting, so I'm just going to raise it now and put it in the bucket later for discussion about options. But what came to mind to me just a minute ago, listening to your comments in response to Councilmember Cunningham's question, thinking about the crack work that we do here for hedging for fuel oil or diesel fuel for the buses. Could we do any type of hedging with regard to steel or any other the primary resources we're going to need for the project? That would not commit us necessarily, but at least we could hedge so that we could manage longer term the costs of those components. So it's just food for thought.
It's an interesting idea. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just to follow up Gary's point, so if as you move forward, if the project scope changes as you try to hold in, check the costs, at any point does it require, what might require amending the supplemental DEIS or the SDS? Do you ever have to go, would anything trigger having to go back and amend that?
Sure, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Dorfman. There's many gradations of that question. And so I will not recount the examples from my project history where that has occurred, but let's just pick an example from the Green Line. And so we had actually completed the DEIS, the supplemental DEIS, and the FEIS for the Green Line. And then at the 11th hour, President Obama and Secretary LaHood said, we're going to change how we rate these projects, and we're going to eliminate the pass-fail requirement under the cost-effectiveness index because of the 3 infill stations on University Avenue. Saving the council all the history, which is very interesting to guys like me, but the policy impact was that those 3 new stations now could be included day 1 for the project, which they previously could not be. But because there were 3 new stations, we had to do a supplemental document to the final document. So as scope changes, we need to have that environmental impact in mind. But I will caution that anytime we get back into the environmental process adds time. And what happened on Central is we thought we would have that federal document in 2010, and with that the additional stations, additional environmental review comment periods, it wasn't until April 2011 until that full funding grant could be provided after all the environmental work had been completed.
One of the first big things all of us got to do as new council members, go celebrate the full funding grant agreement.
That's right.
In April.
That's right.
April 26, 2011, another important milestone day in Met Council's history.
All right, any other questions? Otherwise, we can move to the next part.
Yes, next section. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is the forward-looking segment of our presentation tonight, and that is in response to Chair Dunnock and Governor Dayton's requests of us. So let me just walk us through this. The 4 big tasks as assigned are captured on the summary 18 slide. It's a transit options review. It is the construction cost estimate, and I'll get into more detail on each of these. It's a technical capacity, capability, and competency review of how we manage these big projects. And then fourthly, if LRT emerges as the preferred mode, preferred option, then what kind of cost reduction activities can we put in place to rein in on that budget increase of $341 million? The transit options review, per the directive of Chair Dunnock, we have to take a look at what are alternatives to LRT in this corridor, and so we've identified 3 that we understand we should be evaluating anew. That's a no-build, do-nothing. It is what we call enhanced bus, so that's more buses operating more frequently over a longer period of the day on existing roadway network. And it's a bus rapid transit alternative, which is more buses more frequently, more service over the course of the day, but on some of the dedicated right-of-way that we've already identified for the rail line on the 4 Southwest. And then it's the light rail project, essentially as we know it. We would compare it, the 16-mile, 17 new stations as the LRT option. So we compare and contrast. Now, thanks to the good work Hennepin County did last decade, Councilmember Dorfman could speak to this more specifically than myself, but that's what was called an alternatives analysis. That was a federal funding requirement for these big projects. So from 2005 to 2009, Hennepin County commissioned that alternatives analysis to look at a much longer slate of options. Different alignments, different modes, and so our assignment here is more focused on these 4 options. So we'll pivot from that analysis from last decade, but we need to update with new data in terms of the census data. The analysis last decade obviously works with 2000. We would update that with 2010. Update the ridership impacts, cost impact of these options. So we would report back to you with that based on these kind of metrics that we would evaluate against those 4 options. Cost, sorry.
Mr. Chair, can I just mention, and you alluded to it, I mean, the Policy Advisory Committee that oversaw the alternatives analysis was a group that included county commissioners and mayors and city council members and business community, Met Council staff as well. And that analysis looking at no-build, BRT, the other options was quite thorough. And
yes.
So the only time I got nervous is when you said a review I think makes sense, but there was a lot of thought, careful analysis, a lot of information that went into removing each of those options as we move through the process.
Well, thank you for that, Councilmember Dorfman, and that's why the second sub-bullet there under review these transit options is a narrower slate of options. It's 4, not the dozens that had first been reviewed. And it is for the BRT and LRT, it's within the adopted locally preferred alternative alignment. So we're not looking at different alignments elsewhere. As we understood the assignment, Mr. Chair, it's to look at the corridor as defined right now for LRT and compare a more dedicated BRT and LRT in the defined alignment.
Mr. Chairman?
Councilmember Barber?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you're looking at these different transit options, are you looking at any hybrid options where there could be light rail to a certain point combined with bus rapid transit out from that, or are you looking at them independently?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Barber, for this component of the transit options review, it's really a single option compared to a second or a third or a fourth option as identified in the bullets. If you could hold that question until we get to the cost reduction component, that's when we may have more opportunity for some hybrid bus light rail. So the question is on target, and we'll talk about that a little bit more.
Fair enough.
Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, my question was on a similar vein to that. And the real question is so we get these options. I'm trying to understand the process of decision making here. So we go back to the drawing board. We look at these various options. We're going to get some criteria by which to say which of these options make the most sense, I would think. And then the question of then that's really a judgment call again about which of these options make the most sense, because some of them are going to be less costs. You know, so I'm trying to figure out, are we looking at cost as a variation here because cost is driving this decision? Are we looking at long-term impact? I'm just trying to figure out what we're looking at with regards to the criteria to go back to the drawing board to redo some work that kind of was already done before.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Cunningham, we would probably not characterize it as going back to the drawing board and starting from zero. We are able to take advantage of the work that Hennepin County did commission under its alternatives analysis last decade. So we would pivot from that as it applies to these options that had already been looked at. And then we would update with new census data, new employment data based on the 2010 data that is now available, which was not available obviously last decade. So the second half of your question about, so what's the basis for our review, that's what we've tried to capture here on this slide 20. The metrics that we would overlay those 4 transit options to provide that data back to you for consideration as to, you know, what's the best investment, what's the best public investment to put in this corridor.
Okay. Councilmember Lachowski.
Seems like a lot of the decision in front of us is based on what funding is going into this and what the communities along the route say. So is that going to be part of the information you will bring back to us? What do we lose by moving to these other modes, that kind of question?
Well, Mr. Chair and Council Member, certainly we have to move these analyses through the process of our project staff does the technical analysis, but that's only the first step. Then we have to bring it back to our 5 partner cities, Hennepin County and you all, for consideration as to really the policy question is where is the best public investment in any of these 4 options going forward here. So we will assemble that. We will do so in concert and in cooperation with our partner cities. I've spent all day today with Chair Dunick, first at our county's Transit Improvement Board meeting, earlier this afternoon with our own Project Corridor Management Committee that comprises the cities in the county, MnDOT, and now with the Committee of the Whole. So it's really those 3 entities. I guess I'd add the 4th, and that's the Hennepin County Regional Railroad Authority, who is also a funding partner, also has to grant municipal consent on these projects. So we'll report out the information, but we'll share it with all those project partners so that then you can benefit from their thoughts, their inputs as to the best choice going forward.
And if I would indulge the committee just for a moment, I mean, we sat through those 2 meetings today, and I don't think anybody talked about anything other than light rail transit, just to be clear, from CTIP to the CMC. We feel like it's our obligation to do our due diligence and take a look at these options and maybe understand why they were rejected. An important audience member asked for that, the governor being one of those people. So I think that it's important to take a look at, but I think today, even just today, I would characterize it as a consensus emerged pretty strongly that we need to move forward on LRT and figure out a way to cut the costs and reduce the budget in a way that it's affordable. Councilmember Mudd.
Chair Dunick, folks, you probably know I have co-chaired the Community Advisory Committee for the last 5 years. We saw the presentation that you're seeing today, and it was a room of 40 people. Not one person said that we should pull the plug on this project. Not one person said we should consider a mode other than light rail. And there was a strong recognition that when we do a light rail project, we're committing trains to tracks for the rest of our lives. And it's a really important decision. And a $341 million cost overrun is serious business. But people also recognized that whether it was Hiawatha or Central or North Star, when a project gets to this phase, It is typical to revisit scope, to rein in the costs, and once we did that, and once we told our staff, here is the cost, not a cent more, here's when we need to open, we have delivered 3 rail projects on time and on budget. And I have complete confidence in our staff's ability to do that a 4th time. And I'd venture to say that's why the federal government trusts us with a full funding grant agreement to move a project forward. It's because we've demonstrated our ability to do it and to pick alignments where the ridership has far exceeded anybody's expectations. If you were to ask people who are in the habit of riding the Hiawatha or Central Corridor today, and you said, could we take your train away from you now? They would fight to keep their train. And I just want the people in this room to know that no light rail project would ever have happened without the perseverance of the people around these tables. When I leave here tonight, I'm going to a meeting with the city of Hopkins and the city of Minnetonka. They're moving forward to plan their station area at Shady Oak. There are people who have been planning this project for a decade. This is not something we walk away from. It's something where we sharpen our pencils, we make the tough decisions about how we rein in the costs, and then we deliver a 4th project on time and on budget.
Our hope would be to complete this transit options review as outlined and bring that back to the Corridor Management Committee and you all in about a month. The second task before us is to commission a 3rd-party construction cost estimate review. And this really is undertaken by an action that you took in 2013 when you directed us to solicit and you then approved hiring a peer review consultant. So that did happen 2 years ago, and they are on board before we encountered this cost increase. We built that contract scope so that they would come in and give their assessment of the sufficiency of our 30%, 60%, 90% design plans. And we also built in the ability to do what we call 10 spot reports, where at our directive, they come in, quickly mobilize, and do a review that we customize for them to undertake. This is a prime example of one of those spot reviews, where they have already been commissioned and tasked to do this, and they will report back to us and to we'll be prepared to share that with everybody here again in about a month, how this new estimate looks in terms of its comprehensiveness and correctness. The third task at hand here is what we've dubbed the technical capacity review, and this is in response to Governor Dayton, where he has said that he has concerns about the technical capability, capacity, and the competency for Met Council and the project team to manage a project of this scope and magnitude. So here again, we believe it's best to bring in an outside party to look at our management structure and management processes at the project office and develop a report and bring that back to the policymakers. So we're working with regional administration to commission this work. It would not be managed by us, and get that commissioned this month, a report next month, and bring that back at the end of June. Is there a question? Nope. Okay. The fourth component here that we are embarking upon is the cost reduction piece. And this is to take the LRT, if LRT is the preferred mode in the alignment that has been adopted by all the cities, county, and Met Council, and look at how we can slim and trim the cost of this project by $341 million has been the target that we have been given at our 2 prior meetings today. but to identify potential cost reductions greater than the 341, so to give you all some latitude on identifying what components of those cost reductions. And this gets to Councilmember Barber's suggestion, so what kind of hybrid might we be looking at here? So if there are places where we can perhaps cut back a station in any one of the 5 cities, for example, how then can we still provide a lower cost bus service that still allows people to link up with a station, but it might not be at the station closest to their residence. They'd have to hop a bus and then take that to the later station. So those are the sorts of things that certainly we can consider. So in doing this effort, we have solicited from the county and the cities any of their ideas that they would offer and ask us to analyze. And so we've begun that process here in the last day with the meeting with the cities and the county yesterday and the formal meetings today. How we go about looking at these impacts really is important, given the sensitivity locally and for your own constituents serving in your capacity as council members. So we reminded ourselves yesterday, you all have already adopted some scoping principles on how we go about evaluating these. And that was done actually more than 2 years ago. And the essence of those, these are really the highlight items, is that first and foremost, what we design and build has to be safe and secure for our riders, for our employees. We have to take into consideration how that relates to the FTA rating. We are in a competition here. And when the President's New Starts report came out in February, we were one of 7 projects recommended for funding, federal funding. All of those 7 projects had a medium-high overall rating. So we need to keep our eye on the ball here, and what adjustments we make, we need to try to do so in the context of not diminishing our rating, but maintaining that medium-high so we can stay nose to nose with those other 6 projects.
Just one point on that
Yes.
last slide, and as you analyze this related to ridership, I mean, one of the things that seems to have changed over time is ridership estimates per station, and so that'd be interesting to look at, I think, as you do this review, and to really make sure we fully understand what's driving that ridership, and including some future, and by future I mean some pretty near-term development at those stations that will also drive ridership, things like that, because there's been some pretty drastic changes in those estimated number of riders per station.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Dorfman, you have the institutional history to know that to be a fact, and absolutely it is. So saving you all the FTA methodology here, what we need to do when we impact those, analyze those ridership impacts, we have to do so based on the approved FTA ridership model. And yes, they have shifted over time based on various input assumptions. Now we are able to use 2010 census data. Arlene McCarthy's staff has loaded all that data into the regional ridership model, so we can pivot off of that and then overlay the FTA ridership model. So we'll look at what a full build of the LRT would be, and we know that that's 34 or 35,000 passengers per weekday out in 2030. And then if we start to nip away at a station here or a station there, we have to look at that loss of ridership vis-a-vis against the overall project, as we've currently estimated that ridership.
Mr. Chairman, I would have one concern, and I don't know how we weigh this, but I think we do know that the ridership on the Wellston, Van Light, and Penn are lower than on other parts of the station. So I'd hate to have this nips happen to our most dependent transit riders, which are some of the folks that live in those communities. So I'd be a little concerned about some of this and its impact on the equity question as we move forward, because so often low-income communities get left out of the picture as we go forward, and I just want to make that clear from my position on this. Because the way that would go would be problematic if we just look at that as the ultimate goal, given what you just said.
And Mr. Chair, that's where the policy feedback and input will be critical. It's not just the cost savings and it's not just the ridership. FTA calls that environmental justice, equity, and so that's part of the filter that we need to keep in mind here.
Right, and Mr. Chairman, I did want to say that since the time that our ridership numbers were originally developed, FTA actually has kind of shifted. It's because I think it was used to be based just on a cost formula of CI something.
Councilmember, you're thinking of the cost effectiveness index, and FTA has changed that definition. That's one of the criteria that we'll have to consider, but not the only one.
Okay.
That's very well.
Just want to be clear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was looking at the alternatives analysis documents a little bit while the discussion was going on to try to refresh my memory, and it appears, scanning through it, that the BRT dedicated guideway options that they looked at presumed relocation of freight in the one very difficult corridor that we had all of the controversy over. I think it's, I mean, the governor did say all options are on the table and that we need to do our due diligence of evaluating all options, but how can we do that if the BRT option, the only allowable thing to look at is with the relocation of freight? The two don't mesh, and I think we owe it to the taxpayers to do a true due diligence with something that is actually possible rather than just saying, okay, we're going to look at BRT, but we know it already it's not going to work. I mean, that's a sham process, and with this kind of money, we need to be very diligent in our analysis, and there has to be something to look at besides relocating freight in the Kenilworth corridor to have BRT on a dedicated guideway as an option.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Councilmember Wolf, good observation, and I would respond to say to have the closest possible apple-to-apple BRT versus LRT, that we could assume, if you all concur, that BRT would run in that half-mile long tunnel under the co-location freight rail BRT buses in that half-mile tunnel versus LRT trains.
Okay.
The only way to keep it within the current scope, essentially, there. Councilmember Mudd?
Chair Dunick, it's also important for everybody to recognize that we need to come up with a solution that gets municipal consent from 5 different cities, too.
I mentioned that we are in this national competition for scarce federal dollars, and so I just want to spend 3 minutes here on a refresher on what that involves. FTA, when they rate these New Start rail projects or BRT projects, look at this 50-50 weight between the technical justification ratings and the financial ratings. There's a half a dozen of the sub-criteria under project justification. Councilmember Cunningham was remembering one of them, and that's the cost effectiveness index. But it's also about economic development and land use, like Councilmember Dorfman was mentioning here.
Mr. Chairman, this is a little behind. So there was some talk about commuter rail as an option, and I didn't see that as one of the options, but that had been brought up by a number of people. I don't know if that's, if in fact that was an option, or if it was considered in your review, or, you know, because I know it's come up several times and a couple of representatives have raised it, etc.
Yeah, it came up at the CMC today too.
Yes.
Berman.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Cunningham, it is not on our slate of 4 options to review. If we were to consider a freight rail option as something that we want to look at, let me just...
Commuter rail.
Or commuter rail on freight rail. The reality is that this corridor has 3 freight rail operations on it. It has Burlington Northern Santa Fe up near Target Field. The Wayzata subdivision operates through there right now, east-west. It has the Hennepin County-owned track with trackage rights agreement with the Twin Cities and Western Railroad through Minneapolis and Kenilworth that you're aware of. And the third railroad we would deal with would be the Canadian Pacific, west of Minneapolis in St. Louis Park and in Hopkins, a portion of Hopkins. In each of those cases, for all 3 of those different freight operations, it's single track. So that is a serious constraint if we were to pursue the freight rail option, commuter rail on freight rail option, that the we'd have to have trackage rights agreements, and we would have to figure out how much service capacity we could put in that corridor. Given the fact that we're forecasting out of the 25,000 passengers per weekday and ultimately growing to 35,000 passengers per weekday, freight rail service, commuter rail service on freight rail would not have the capacity to service that many passengers for much of the day, that would operate only every half hour or so, similar to North Star. We would not have sufficient seat capacity to service the passenger demand.
Okay, I'm just wondering why it wasn't on the table, so I'm trying to.
Firma, was it studied in the AA, the alternative analysis? It was.
Briefly studied and quickly removed for those reasons.
Thank you.
On the financial side, there's 3 sub-criteria. This was really where the primary increase in our rating occurred last February, due to the fact that both our funding partners, CTIB and HICRA, committed their full shares, 30% overall funding from CTIB and 10% overall funding from HICRA. What that then did was take our overall rating from a medium to a medium high, and you can see our financial commitment rating went from a medium high previously to a high. There's the details there, but bottom line is this project is a medium high and is in competition with 6 other medium high rated projects. Greg might need to help me on moving the next slide. Thank you. That's probably a cue that we should be about done. The battery's wearing out, right? So what we've done on the, moving on to the final piece of this cost reduction option, we have developed this sample matrix. We have not populated it yet because today we wanted to hear ideas from the cities, the county, yourselves, if you have any, about cost reductions that we should evaluate and analyze with these sorts of metrics across the top columns here. So upon completion of today's briefing, tomorrow's task for our project team will begin to populate this and analyze the impacts of those various cost reduction ideas that we would then circle back with our project partners and with you to review and discuss. Here's where I catch my breath, and certainly welcome any and all cost reduction ideas that we can add to our evaluation.
Mr. Chairman,
Councilman Schreiber.
maybe while people are thinking about cost reduction ideas, and it's a little difficult not having the kind of detail that the project, the engineers and technical staff have. But at CTIB this morning, the chair, Commissioner McLaughlin, said that he had a personal conversation with folks from FTA, and maybe you could relay that for this group, because it does, the other 7 projects bump a bit and bump along a bit at this stage of around the nation. And maybe you could just share what's happening around with some of our peer cities and what Commissioner McLaughlin reported to us this morning.
Sure, I'd be happy to, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Schreiber. And I know Chair Dunick had a conversation with the FTA at the administrator a week ago, so to preview for Teresa McMillan these new updates, so that they would be aware of those before it became known last Monday. But I would say, coming upon my 30th anniversary of working in the New Starts business in Washington, D.C. and here in Minnesota, it is not unusual for these projects to go through this really critical self-evaluation phase as these costs are updated, unfortunately, but not unusually. They tend to tick up. So there has to be this self-assessment about trimming some scope to fit within the budget and affordability. In the case of some of those other LRT projects that we are in competition with, there's actually 3 projects that are quite similar to ours in terms of scope. There's 2 in Maryland. One is their red line in Baltimore and their purple line in the DC suburbs on the Maryland side of the Beltway. The red line project and the purple line project in the DC suburbs both came into the FTA pipeline the same time we did in 2013, so they've had 3 years of preliminary engineering. The red line project has increased $779 million. And the the purple line project in the suburbs there of DC has increased $523 million. The third project that is on head-to-head competition with this is a San Diego LRT extension project. They too have seen increases. Theirs has been a little bit less. It's $309 million. That project has increased. All 3 of those examples, Baltimore, DC suburbs, San Diego, are all at a total current cost estimate between 2.1 and 2.9 billion, all 3 greater than our project. So what Commissioner McLaughlin reported and also what Chair Dunick has discussed with the FTA officials in DC is it's not unusual for these projects to go through a little bit of challenge to align the scope with the available dollars from the local funding partners. FTA is on board. They have been and will continue to be. And I know that FTA will be here for their monthly visit in 2 weeks. We will provide them similar updates as we move forward to critically evaluate what the cost and adjustments in the scope.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Councilmember Dorfman.
So, just to respond to your question about throwing cost reduction ideas on the table.
Yes.
So, partly because I actually have great faith in the technical capacity of the project office, and because I think it would be just a free-for-all to sort of open everything up. And we're not going to do that. I mean, I don't think anybody would suggest we're going to put freight rail location back on the table again. But I think it would be really helpful to have some guidance from the project office in terms of what, framing that. I can think of some things in addition to freight that probably shouldn't be back on the table. The location of the maintenance facility, for example, would be another one I'd put in. And so before we sort of say, well, where do you think we can cut costs? I mean, it'd be great to have that guidance, and I'm sure the mayors and city council members will say the same thing. And
they have.
And so that sort of question about where should we cut as a really sort of open-ended doesn't kind of make any sense to me.
Well, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Dorfman, it's a fair comment, and that's really the same feedback we got yesterday when Chair Dunick and I attended a meeting with the cities in the county. And so we wanted to at least offer a window of opportunity because we don't have all the answers by no means in the project office, but we do have a lot of really smart engineers that are sitting behind me that have already begun to populate a list of cost reductions. So it is our hope that we assemble a list of a couple dozen options that we can then evaluate and bring back to you for your review, and then begin the kind of the policy filter of which seem reasonable, which gets us under an LRT option gets us approaching that $341 million that we heard from our two partner agencies this morning and this afternoon to get us back to that 1.65 where we were last summer.
Councilmember Commerce?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mark, the timeframe for the identification of prospective reductions seems incredibly aggressive to me, to bring something back in 2 weeks to this group. Can you just talk a little bit about sort of mechanically, how does it work to contemplate 20% or more reductions as kind of a menu that could be considered in a real-time environment like this table?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Cummers, yes, it's very aggressive, and yes, we can certainly circle back to you all for additional feedback. And what I will say is that in the larger process here, we're going to need to move this analysis through quickly on all four fronts that I've outlined here tonight. And the reason for that is that, actually, Mr. Chair, if I may, maybe that's the perfect segue into the schedule to conclude today's briefing.
I was thinking the same thing.
So thank you for that entree, Councilmember Commerce. We're going to go to the Met Council. We've got about an 8 or 9 week window here to complete these analyses, and that brings us to early July. And the reason that we've outlined this very aggressive schedule is because whatever the policy direction is, if it is anything in the New Starts world that we are currently residing in for the Southwest project and have resided in since 2011, we're going to need to take that policy direction and do a lot of work very quickly to reassemble the documentation that FTA requires. That is due to FTA each year on or about September 1. That they then incorporate, FTA will look at it, maybe now even FRA is going to look at it, Office of Management and Budget is going to look at it, and that then is what is used to assemble their annual New Starts report, and more importantly, inputs to the President's recommended budget. So we have a window of opportunity here that remains to be 1 more year under President Obama's administration. He's got 1 more federal budget in him. That will be his proposed 2017 budget. So we need to line up, position this project with that updated information in FTA's hands on about Labor Day so that they can run that through their federal vetting process. Our goal is to be in the President's recommended budget in 2017 for this project to secure our full funding grant later in 2017, actually end of 2016 with this President.
Councilmember Barber?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one of the things you described early on as a critical path as far as the timing for the overall project to start 2019-2020 was the publish the final EIS and the issue the ROD.
Yes.
If we're within that 8 to 9 week window, can that still be accomplished, or are we still behind schedule-wise regardless?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Barber, working hard, working smart within that 8 to 9 week window, that allows us to achieve those dates on that slide under the right-hand column. Mr. Chair, that concludes our Southwest update for the Committee of the Whole.
Any questions? Councilmember Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have another question on schedule. So the transit option review is due to be presented to the CMC on June 3rd, and yet the cost options presentation is to us, if I'm reading the schedule right, on May 20th. But won't the transit options review help inform what the cost options presentation is?
Mr. Chairman, Councilmember Rodriguez, we really believe, given the compressed timelines here, that we need to pursue those in parallel for a while for the next month or so, and then they will merge in June so that you have the benefit of not only the 4 big options, but then there may be sub ABC under the LRT option with cost reductions. So we need to work them both now, and then beginning in June, we'll have to take those into consideration in the larger context. If LRT is the preferred option, then we will have cost reduction scenarios as they would apply to LRT.
Chavez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question, then after this question, I want to share a couple of thoughts.
Sure.
The first comment is, I admire your chutzpah for this little project. I'm really impressed with the presentation, that whole thing, so thanks for doing that. And thanks for the commitment. Question for us, because of you have the legacy for these huge projects. So we're presented now at the 20% delta. What was the experience at this stage in the process at Green Line and then also at Blue Line? Was there much of a delta when you reached this 40% mark of design? To what extent was there? Because I think I'm going to talk about in a minute is what's called sticker shock. And so I wanted to just kind of orient us on some history of how we got here.
Mr. Chair, Council Member Chavez, real quick. The Green Line Central Corridor project actually had a minimal amount of cost variability. And the reason for that is, in large part, we're operating in the middle of the street. And so the lay of the land, if you will, was pretty well known. So we had on the low end about a 909 estimate, on the high end bumping up against a $1 billion estimate, and we landed in the middle of that at 957. So there wasn't a lot of the sticker shock, as you might characterize it, on the Green Line. Blue Line Hiawatha was a different situation. Early on, and that had been through, just like Southwest, many variations as the scope was being developed over the years. The actual first environmental document for Hiawatha was published in 1985. The supplemental document for Hiawatha was published 14 years later. So it gives you a sense of the gestation of that project. As the designs were developed and the costs assigned, that project, when I got involved in 1998, was 440. Which then changed to 525, 540, 625, and a full funding grant for 675.
Thanks for sharing that, some perspective. I think part of what the community, the region, might be feeling, because at least I'm feeling it for the past 10 days, was the sticker shock. And, when I got the call, I'm saying, what's going on? And I think it's, to characterize it from my desk would be maybe unrealistic or unmet expectations. Is that I think many of us, myself included, and maybe I'm just ignorant, at the time where we were, that we approved this project to proceed, I thought we were much further along in what I'd call a confidence level. This might go to a question that Councilmember Cunningham asked earlier in the session. So that what will be our confidence level down the road about whatever new number we arrive at, that people can rely on that. When I try to compare that with major projects I've worked on for 2 corporate headquarters, which are billion-dollar projects, I could not be in this position going to the CEO and the board of directors and saying there's a 20% increase. That would be dead in the water. I could not do that. So there's a lot of work that we need to get done, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it happen. So I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying we got a big meal in front of us to digest. And I share your comments about, I'm willing to make this happen, but let's not kid ourselves. $341 million is a big number, a big nut to crunch. So let's do it and see what we can do. But man, I'm with you. Thanks.
Good comment. Thanks. Councilmember Mudd?
Chair Donick, when I heard about 341 million, my head went back to the day that Craig put me in a van and actually showed me the alignment in Eden Prairie. And at that point, I realized this is a whole lot different than Hiawatha or Central, because both of those projects were built in a built environment. We knew what was under the soil. We, in Eden Prairie, are going through wetlands, and it was clear that this would be extremely difficult. So that's one thing, you know, wetlands versus built environment. The other piece is, when we did Hiawatha, success was about connecting points A and B with track. And now our alignment decisions are different because we choose an alignment that allows for transit-oriented development. When we did Hiawatha, it was let's build it and then we'll worry about transit-oriented development later. Now, for example, in Eden Prairie, we chose an alignment that allows a town center to be built. And so that's a difference, but it's also an expectation of the feds that we choose an alignment that capitalizes on the transit-oriented development potential. So I think the public needs to know that the Green Line extension is a lot different than the two other light rail projects that we've done.
Anybody else? All right, well, this is a big Councilmember.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt you. Councilmember Mott's comments just inspired me to just make a comment that for me, you know, if we have sort of a matrix of considerations, ways of trying to reach toward 20 to 25% reduction, it does strike me, and here's my caveat, that I've not been involved in the corridor planning or the, you know, helping the 5 communities reach consensus, et cetera. So that's a little bit, maybe it's off color for me to say this, but if we've got mode that's in play and we've got, you know, costs around systems and stations that are in play, I wonder if alignment on some level also needs to be in play if we want to reach toward that 20 to 25% reduction. So I just want to make that comment and make that suggestion. It seems like it would be a missing piece to a missing dimension of the consideration if we did not revisit it.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Commerce, fair observation, but from the staff, I need to respond honestly and frankly to say that if we choose to move the alignment, and if that's the policy direction, we would be back into supplemental to the supplemental EIS, and 2020 would not be achievable, and I'm not sure if FTA would keep the project on their pipeline for full funding grant. We would be going backwards and delaying further if we open up new alignments to explore here. Plus, I won't be able to deliver that in 8 weeks' time.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate that, and that's, none of that is surprising to me. I appreciate your candor. I do have some concerns about how within the constraints of just, you know, the length of the alignment potentially, or the other pivot points that we have available to us, how do we get to $350 million less than what we're currently projecting as the budget? It seems like a pretty tight, you know, a tight squeeze.
And Mr. Chair and Councilmember Cummers, I mentioned this at the prior meetings today. Yeah, it is a really big hill to climb in a very short period of time. So I think it will help, at least help my technical team here at the project office to look at kind of 3 stratifications of potential cost and scope reductions. It's the $1 to $9 million, which still is a lot of money, but those are the small adjustments.
Mm-hmm.
But over 16 miles, that could add up. There's the medium value, which are the 10 to 99 million, and then there's the more than 100 million types of reductions. So our team is going to look at each of those and cost reduction options within each of those 3 levels of savings. So whatever combination, and Councilmember Barbara was way ahead of the discussion when she asked her question. So maybe it's one of the greater than 100, it's a couple of the 10 to 100, and then a little bit of, you know, a couple of the minor ones for $5 million a piece that make this ultimate attempt here to rein in this budget back to the 1.65 billion.
Thank you.
Councilmember Wolf?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to expand upon what Councilmember Chavez said, since I've been here since the LPA and the whole change in the budget. It wasn't just this time. I mean, 1.2 billion, everybody went, holy cow, that's a lot of money. And it went to 1.6, and everybody went, holy cow, that's a lot of money. Now we're at 2 billion, and yeah, that's a really, really lot of money. I think strategically, as far as looking at these cost reductions, we have to be willing to consider all of the options on the table, including a different mode. Seriously consider it if people are going to be serious about cutting the cost. Because if you say, no, we're going to drive this through to LRT no matter what, well, why would I want to give up a station, or why would I want to give up whatever along the line to get to that dollar amount of reduction? This is a big deal.
All right, well, it's a big moment for the project, certainly, and we will be talking a lot about it internally and with our partners. I mean, this is another reminder about the odd role in which we kind of play in a project like this, which is to charge with being the owner and operator and developer of the project, working on it from beginning to end, essentially from 1% to 100%, while only carrying 10% of the financial responsibility and sharing that with partners around the region. So it's going to be tough terrain to navigate, but I have a lot of confidence in Mark and his team, Craig and others, the project office, to keep moving this thing forward. So there's no other comments and questions. We will stand adjourned, and we'll be in touch with everybody about this project. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Adam, Jeff and Peter. Well done.
Oh, there were tunnels and cardboard issues and all that. And I watched it. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Mr.
Really?
Tell me about it.
Nope, not for you, sorry.
Not for me. Okay, thank you. I'm not recording. But I would like to sit down and do a video. You will not, you will not. Because it's just my recording as they requested me to do. You don't have any objections to that?
But no, I just wanted to make sure.
We actually have 43,000.
And then
Yes, it can be really worth it. All right, I'll send it. You bet. If the project terminated before it touched these birds, we would not
To talk to you, I apologize.
Bob again, no time to talk, not even a quick question?
Nope, not for you, sorry.
Not for me. Okay, thank you. Before I attempted to talk with Chair Dunick, I saw Councilmember Gary Cunningham and explained to him I could only tape for about 5 minutes, and because I wanted to try to talk with Dunick, I couldn't prudently interview him. As you'll hear from the audio, because he was munching on some nuts, I agreed to edit the tape. Consequently, I don't show video for some of this. He appears willing to talk later, and I look forward to doing that, especially because I have a lot of alternative ideas for radically better transit service in North Minneapolis. Adam won't talk to me. Adam won't talk to me.
You didn't want me.
You're on, and I've got 4 minutes left.
I wanted you all this time, Bob, and you didn't want me. I was like, I heard that.
I apologize, but I've got 4 minutes.
That was insulting, man.
I don't mean to be insulting. I don't mean to be insulting. But I do have a couple questions.
Okay.
Did you hear what I heard?
You're
It
going to
sounded.
take a picture of me while I'm eating, Bob. That's terrible, man.
I'll edit that out. Okay.
I'm telling you, man, that is terrible.
I will edit out to.
I would not take a picture of you while you were eating, Bob. I think that's like really disgusting, man.
I won't. I'll edit. I'll edit
here. I'm really chewing, man. You're trying to take a picture of me. Why is that, Bob?
Gary, I've still got 4 minutes left, and I'll edit that part out. How about that? Okay. I mean, I don't want to embarrass anybody, but
he's gonna have me chewing on tape.
But no, I will edit. I'll edit.
I need to talk to you, and I gotta leave right now.
Okay.
Can I get you in a couple minutes?
I gotta talk to Mike.
Okay.
Yeah. You can call right now.
Well, no, I do want to talk to you if at all possible.
So what's up?
I've got this running. I'm making a request to get a tape recording of the meeting.
Sure. Send it to me via email, and
Real good.
and we'll do it. That's
Appreciate it. Thank you.
if the record. I don't know.
I just talked to the guy and they said it was recorded and that it ran from convening to adjourning. That's what I'd like to get.
Then it's a public document.
Oh,
We'll
absolutely.
get it to you.
Real good. Thank you.
All right. Sure.
One question? I'm just walking to. My question is, did I hear Adam Dunick correctly? It sounds like he's saying that no build is no longer an option. Would you say that's a correct summary?
You'd have to ask Adam. I can't speculate on what
But
he meant.
did you hear what he said on that, though? Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. Mr. Furman?
Yes, sir.
Got one question. Do you think?
I'm finishing my day, Bob.
Okay. You don't have time for a question? Just a real quick one.
I've been at this 11 hours today.
It's been a long day.
Yes,
I
it
certainly
has.
understand that, but it's really just 1 minute, one question. What do you think?
I'm listening. I haven't promised an
The
answer.
question is, do you think it's fair, based on what Chair Dunick said, to say that the no-build option is off the table?
That was a statement made by the chair. You'll have to ask that question of the chair.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.